If a commercial flight test is not successful, it's typically not the question of stick and rudder skill or the knowledge. More often than not, it's the lack of attention to details.
Welcome to Flying BC, a podcast about the people, planes, and aviation adventures in British Columbia and Canada, with your host, Warwick Patterson.
Welcome to episode 16 of the Flying BC podcast. We're coming up on the 1-year anniversary of the show, and I'm excited to have you all along for the journey so far. I just mailed out some patches to a couple listeners who left reviews on Apple Podcasts. Uwe in Ottawa and Chris in Port McNeill, BC. I'll try and get to everyone over the course of the next few episodes, but this week I've chosen 2 more reviews. Raul D'Souza and Sunil0910. Send an email to podcast@flyingbc.com with your address, and you'll get to join the patch club too. If you want a shot at scoring one of these pretty sweet Flying BC patches, just leave a review on Apple Podcasts or the Facebook page, and you'll be in the running. This week on Flying BC, we're talking with Vancouver-based Anna Serbenenko. Anna is an airshow performer, chief flight instructor at Canadian Flight Centre, and a Transport Canada pilot examiner. But her life involves a lot more than just flying. She has a PhD in financial mathematics, is fluent in 8 languages, or maybe 9, I'm not sure. Upon moving to Canada, she took her first flight, and she was hooked. On this episode, we talk about how to master learning, Anna's journey into aerobatics and airshow performing, and what she sees as a flight examiner. And then we wrap up with Anna sharing some of her experiences on the Canadian Arctic Aviation Tour. Please welcome the Sky Dancer, Anna Serbenenko. So let's start with your journey into aviation and kind of how that all started, because you lived a diverse life before that, traveling around all over the place, and you came to Canada, and that's when you got into aviation.
Yes, I took my first flight 10 days after I immigrated to Canada, but it's not the first moment where I got excited about aviation. I was really interested in getting around. I love traveling, I still do, and my vision was that I wanted to go places, but I wanted to have my own plane and fly it myself. I didn't want to hire a pilot. And I kind of like airlines, but it's still boring to sit in the back. So I did explore the option of getting a pilot license. I wasn't thinking commercial license back then. And back in Ukraine, where I'm from, when I inquired, the only option that I was offered is like, yeah, well, you have to go to the military. Having a newborn baby, going to the Ukrainian military wasn't exactly an option. Yeah. So then my life took me to Switzerland, and it was more widely available. There is some GA in Switzerland. The airspace is very condensed, but there is some. And I could take lessons. The problem is the lessons were ridiculously expensive. So just for comparison, what I was paying for driving lessons in Switzerland was about the same price that I was paying for my flight training when I came to Canada.
Wow. Yeah.
And obviously the flight training back in Switzerland was another 3 times more per hour. So it was just unaffordable because I was a student back then. And it's like, okay, I'll wait for an opportunity. And it presented itself when I immigrated to Canada in 2008. And one of the friends mentioned, oh yeah, my son just got his pilot license. And it was on one of the first meetings here with people in Canada. And it's like, oh yeah, I would like to know more. So I made some phone calls, booked my flight. So 10 days later, I wasn't there, and that was it. I was so amazed that it was so much free. I mean, it wasn't just a humble 152, but for somebody who wanted to do it, it was a big deal. And I was hooked right there. So I got my pilot license, didn't feel like I had enough training. Then I pursued my commercial license, still didn't feel like I had enough training, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I decided to do my instructor rating. And by then I was teaching in high schools, universities, or tutoring for about 10 years. So I figured the combination of flying and teaching was a good fit, and I'm enjoying instructing since then.
And how quickly did you get into aerobatics? Because it seems like you got into that pretty quickly after you got your licenses.
When you look at the timeline, I got my licenses and ratings in 2009. I flew my first air show in 2012. But it didn't feel that fast for me. Nothing happening fast enough for me. I'm a very impatient person. I was actually very much afraid of all the unusual attitudes. I wasn't comfortable doing spins in my training, and I had to really force myself when I had to do it on the flight test or for the purpose of instructing. In fact, when I started instructing, I was hoping that somebody would take my flight with a student if I had to do spins. And that was until my partner, Peter, invited me to say, look, okay, we have a decathlon here. You have to try it. Just one flight. It's like, okay. And by then I did already my tail wheel training, so I was comfortable with flying a tail dragger. But aerobatics just wasn't it. So we went up. We literally did 2 loops, 2 rolls. And it was so comfortable. I felt very much in control. And I can say that even until then, I could do spins. I'm comfortable with them, but it's not the most comfortable maneuver. So an encouragement to send out there for pilots who think they are not comfortable with aerobatics because they don't like spins, try the actual full spectrum of aerobatics, because loops and rolls are very comfortable, very controlled, and it's a lot of fun. So after that first aerobatic flight, I got my aerobatic instructor rating probably within a month with Michael Peer.
Nice.
And I started instructing, and I think it was a year or so later that it was Boundary Bay Airshow, and it was not even about me performing. It was just to showcase a local school that does aerobatic training. And I flew my first routine at Boundary Bay Airshow without too many aspirations to go all around North America doing the same thing. And I enjoyed it. I liked it. It was different. And then it was producers from the Vanderhoof Airshow that happened to be at that show. And they approached me. It's like, oh, would you mind joining our air show? And their show was a couple of weeks after that. It's like, I would love to. And kind of continued from there on.
Cool.
Just happened. I didn't imagine, like if you asked me 15 years ago if I would be flying air shows, I wouldn't believe that myself.
Yeah.
But here I am.
And you've had some pretty good mentors along the way to kind of show you through that. So Bud Granley, I think, is one of your mentors, and the Granley family is pretty legendary in Canadian air shows, and the listeners might have seen their yak routine the last couple of years. So tell me about your work with Bud Granley.
Bud is the most amazing mentor and the most amazing person. I'm grateful for him, not only for mentoring me through the air show training, but overall, he was a mentor in general as a person. He has guided me through the scenarios that had nothing to do with stick and rudder skills, but it could be either a business aspect of air shows, people aspect of air shows, logistics, lots of things I felt comfortable, and I do feel comfortable picking up the phone back then, like, hey, but I have a question, a problem. He is like, yeah, jump in the plane, come over. And I would fly across the border. He is about 40 minutes south from where we are right now. So I would quickly clear customs, and he would be at his hangar in Boeing Field. And we would just have a chat or go for a flight in the practice area, or just have a conversation. Or any of the events I had privilege of flying in number of air shows, including the Arctic Aviation Tour, by the way, with Bud. And every time the feedback on the flying, both from Bud and his son Ross, both of them are aces, and they give you very constructive feedback, and they keep you on your toes. They keep you improving all the time, and I'm so, so grateful to him.
it seems like the airshow scene is pretty supportive. Like everybody supports each other and tries to carry everybody through getting safer and better and improving everybody's time on the airshow circuit.
Of course, it's everybody's interest as performers, as producers, air bosses, announcers, everybody involved to make airshow a safe environment. I can't say it has always been easy. It's a little bit of an old boys club.
Right.
Friendly but old boys club. So it's still much more supportive people than otherwise. And I'm very grateful that I've made so many friends, so many pretty close friends and trusted people that I've worked with over the airshow years that I wouldn't have met them if I wasn't flying.
Right. Yeah. That's the great thing about aviation is the community around it, I think. So tell me about your routine and what aircraft you fly.
I'm flying a Super Decathlon, call her Sky Dancer. And we are flying with a classical music Ave Maria. It's a graceful sky dance, slower, elegant, and put to the music. When I first developed it, I literally had my headphones, I had the music playing, and the aerobatic maneuvers were put to the music. And eventually I just knew the timing. And with the announcers, we typically know that smoke on, music on, and there we go. It was my second choice of music. The first season I have flown with a little bit different music. You might see it on some of the recordings. Later I switched to Ave Maria also for some personal reasons. I didn't feel that it was just me doing. I felt that God put me up there for a reason, whatever that reason might be, and hopefully it's inspiring and bringing something special. And I wanted to choose the music that would bring a little bit of that message back to the audience, and Maria seemed to be a perfect fit for it.
Yeah, I feel like your airshow routine probably appeals a lot to the kind of the general public that come to shows and the non-pilots, because you see an aircraft that looks like something you'd see at most airports. You're doing graceful aerobatics instead of like expensive warbirds or nimble show-specific aircraft pulling high Gs, so it seems a little more accessible to the general public.
It is. In fact, Super Decathlon is a good training aircraft, so even beginner pilots can access one in most places, rent or train on it, so it's very relatable. And it's also the interest in the airshow is to have something different. And if we all fly the warbirds or all fly extras 300 or pizzas, it would be boring. But to have an aircraft and an act that is different, more slower paced and quiet and elegant, as opposed to high powered and high performance fast jets, I think this is what keeps the audience entertained.
Yeah, like a good concert or an album, you kind of need a flow through an airshow. You don't want everything to be in your face. You need to sort of let people breathe a little bit.
Of course.
Yeah. So you're speaking about how it was a little bit of an old boys club, but when I was preparing for this chat, I was thinking like, oh, I actually know quite a few women who fly air shows. Patty Wagstaff, Julie Clark, Vicky Benzing, yourself. So you must meet a lot of girls and women at air shows who look up to you as a role model. How do you feel being in that role?
I think it is a big responsibility, and my main message, I am not special. I'm just like everybody else, and maybe the only difference is that I set a goal and I was pretty disciplined working hard towards it. And I believe that most people, when they set a goal and they work hard towards it, they can achieve it. And we often have these conversations at the air shows. Oh, how do you get into flying? How do you get to whatever you put your mind to? It doesn't have to be flying. It can be completely non-aviation related. And the most rewarding is when you meet the same person a year or two later at the same air show, and it's like, oh yeah, I got my pilot license. And they run to you to tell you about it because this is what you talked about before, and now they did it, and they feel so proud. And I feel very special when they come and share about it. So it's not about me bringing something they can't do, but it's about helping them to find it in them. And if I could help a little bit, I think my mission is fulfilled.
Yeah, absolutely. So along those lines, what can we do to engage young people, not just women, and get them interested in aviation? It seems like it's this thing that's out of reach for a lot of people. How do we make it more accessible?
I think a big challenge these days that we don't see airplanes all that much. In the past, you could go up to the cockpit in an airliner and talk to pilots and sit in the captain's seat or watch from the back. Now everything is locked up. You're going through the tube into the cockpit, into the cabin, and the only way to know what type of plane it is if you read the safety card.
Yeah, that's right.
So we don't get as exposed to aviation as I feel I even was when I was younger, when I was a kid. I'm dating myself here. And I feel that bringing kids to air shows where they can see the planes up close, where they can talk to the pilots, and depending on the air show security protocols, I love bringing kids to my plane and let them sit in the plane, let them touch the stick, let them take pictures. And it gets them so excited. They feel that this is something real, down to earth, and not somewhere unachievable. And that would be the first step. Beyond that, I believe if there is a will, there is a way. Obviously, flight training is not a cheap endeavor, but when you compare it to it in 1 year of flight training, you probably pay about the same as you would have paid in 5 years of university, with the difference that you train for 1 year and you can start working for the remaining 4 years, when a university student would be still paying 5 years later and not having any work experience, with the same total amount, more or less, paid for the education. So when you look at it that way, it's a profession, very rewarding one, that is within reach, and especially for like Canadian students with various resources that are available out there. I think it's achievable. It still takes work. It's still practice, studying, taking exams, and it requires dedication. There are no two ways about it.
Yeah, kind of, you were talking earlier about how expensive it is in Europe and how restricted it is, and we are super lucky here that this is available to people for not, it takes some money, but not a huge amount of money, and there's scholarships available and things like that.
Definitely, scholarships, student loans, quite a number of them, student loans or grants, commercial and government. Yeah, there are ways.
In your role at Canadian Flight Center, are you seeing most students come through, young people come through looking for a career, or is it sort of a mix between they want to do it for themselves and people who want a career?
It's a mix, definitely. We have a large number of local and international students who are coming for professional training. And naturally, it's the biggest part of our flight training, because they do need their 200 hours plus and sometimes beyond. They're doing their instructor rating with us, often staying to work past that. And we do have people who do it for fun, and not just young people. One of my students was 72. Yeah. 72. Yeah. And he was learning to fly, and maybe he's not picking it up as quickly as an 18-year-old, but he's having fun. He's enjoying it. He got it. He got all his checkouts and licenses, and it's a great retirement project. So yeah. Aviation is truly for everybody. And then the other day I had a fem flight with an 8-year-old girl. And she was all blooming and the most exciting thing. And I will be actually uploading a video of it shortly.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So you seem to be someone who can learn things very quickly, or you just dedicate yourself to learning new things. You have quite an education with your PhD. You're fluent in many languages, and not only a pilot, but you also went to the World Masters Championships, I think, for figure skating recently. So you clearly like to challenge yourself and have taught yourself how to learn, which is key, I think. Yeah, tell me a little bit about that.
I definitely need a challenge, and I need a challenge at all times. Otherwise, life is boring. And yeah, there's probably a little bit of a competitive feature there. I've learned languages starting at my high school, and we had the competitions of different languages and different levels of languages. So obviously I had to do it, and I was lucky enough that the school that I finished had all these resources available. So I went for it, and as I was joking later, I mean, at all different times I was learning 12 different languages. I ended up with 8 more or less fluent. But I was joking, the first 5 are difficult, and then you get used to it.
Right.
And it's probably true with many things we are learning. It gets easier. Once you get a system, it's like, okay, if I'm learning a new language, I need to learn nouns, verbs, I need to know how to build sentences, I need to, etc. Writing, reading, so on. And as you're taking on a new language, you are just basically filling in the cubby holes, but you already have the system of cubby holes that you need to fill. So,
right, so you learned how you yourself learn, because everybody learns a little bit differently. And
exactly. And it's so individual, but as you're learning, you will develop a system. Like some people learn with flashcards, and I've never done that. I just have my way of reading things that I can memorize them. And you will not discover it unless you do it for yourself. And our role as flight instructors is to guide people, because we cannot learn for them. We cannot make them learn. We can only help them learn. And having various ways of doing it, or offering different options until the student finds a way of that works for them, and then just do it over and over and over until you're successful.
yeah, I guess having that sort of arsenal of different examples you can pull out to help illustrate in different ways is important when you become an instructor.
Definitely. And what helped me, because I became an instructor after about 10 years of high school and university teaching that I have been doing. So it was easier to combine. And I had a kid. What I noticed in my instructor class, that students who do have children tend to better instructors, because they have gone through the experience of explaining something to a person who doesn't know anything.
Right.
i.e. kids.
Yeah.
Or new pilots, we are explaining something aviation to somebody who had usually or often no prior exposure to aviation, and having not necessarily their own children, even like babysitting, for example, or daycare experience. It helps. Any prior teaching experience helps to become a better flight instructor down the road. So that was my experience, having gone through like 4 or 5 different universities and doing a few degrees, and adapting to different systems, seeing different systems and finding my ways through them helped me to build an arsenal of tools that I can share with my students now.
Awesome. So I guess that kind of segues into my question. The past 2 episodes have had instructors on the show, and I've asked them a couple of questions. So I'll ask them to you too. And the first one is, what makes a good instructor? And then, what makes a good student?
I think both for the student and the instructor, the key is to never stop learning. Even as instructor, we don't know everything. I keep learning from my students. I keep learning. I'm finding new materials that I can bring to my students. I've started the new study area, and I'm considering to get another PhD in rocket science at this point. And that's because I need to keep learning, and I need a challenge. If we stop learning, we think we know it all, we fall behind. Mm-hmm. And the same is true for the students. When they believe they know it all, or they have put a check mark that they have done their minimum, 60% on the written exam, and therefore they're fine. That's a dangerous attitude. And to be a good student, to be a good instructor, it has to be the mindset of constantly keep learning. You will often see the most humble attitude from a 20,000-hour airline captain, and they keep learning.
Right.
And I very much respect and admire that experience and that attitude.
So you're also a pilot examiner. So that's probably a pretty interesting role. Do you feel like students are as prepared as they should be these days?
Not always.
Yeah.
Definitely trying. And this last year with COVID was more challenging for flight training, definitely, than it has been in the previous years. Transport Canada recently tightened the rules as well on evaluation. In the past, students could have as many twos in their flight test as they want, and it still wasn't a failure. Now they limited the number of twos, so basically the number of major errors. Unfortunately, that naturally drove the average success rate down. What I see is, and this is a little bit surprising for me, especially when I started examining, commercial flight tests on average seem to be less successful than private flight tests, when you would think it's about the same flight test and it's for a person who has more experience. But I think what is happening is that when students are going for their private flight test, they are so focused, they are putting their full effort and they are doing their best. And majority of cases, I think the Canadian average is about 70-75%. It's a successful flight test. By the time they're going for the commercial flight test, they take many things for granted and not necessarily paying that much attention to details. And the details still need to be paid attention to.
Right.
And often enough, if a commercial flight test is not successful, it's typically not the question of stick and rudder skill or the knowledge. More often than not, it's the lack of attention to details for whatever reason it might be. So a recommendation out there for students preparing for their flight test, just do your best effort. Don't take anything for granted. And actually, I also have the flight test debrief series by myself and Peter, who is examiner for multi and IFR, and I'm doing private and commercial. And we have a series on YouTube talking about specific flight tests. Obviously, no names, no school, no aircraft, no student names. But we're talking about typical mistakes, something that we have seen and something that we suggest to improve and how. So it's free resource out there. Feel free to use it.
Oh, perfect. I'll put the link to that in the show notes so people can find it. I guess that kind of touches on where I was going to go next, which what is your advice for students about to take their check ride? But I guess preparation is probably the key thing, isn't it?
Very, very much so, yes. And listen to your instructor. They've been through it before.
Right. Their job is to get you to pass. So.
And they have a personal interest in it. It goes on their record too, not just yours.
Right. Yeah. We don't really have required like flight reviews. They have biennial flight reviews in the States where you have to go up and have basically a check ride every 2 years. But I feel like upset recovery and aerobatic training would be a good option for pilots who want to be proactive about their refresher training here in Canada and keeping their flight chops sharp, to steal Steve's slogan. You guys teach that. Is that something you believe?
Very much so. And in fact, Canada still requires recurrent training. It might be not as formal as biannual flight review in the States. You're still required to do something regular related to your flight training. And within our school, we usually want students to go at least once a year with an instructor. And often enough, we would go through the emergency procedures, because if it's a renter and they're taking the plane to go to Chilliwack regularly, how often would they do spins and stalls on the way with their family, right? Probably never. Luckily, never. But you never know when the emergency hits, and it typically comes unannounced. And to be prepared, you want to have your emergency procedures and unusual recovery skills sharp and fresh. And yeah, we would usually ask people to do it at least once a year. Not at least regularly, once a year. And spins, stall recovery, not just the textbook version straight and level, but from a practical scenario. We simulate up at the altitude you're going for the takeoff and pitch up too much and didn't pay attention. Now what? How do you recover from a full power stall? How do you recover from a climbing turning stall? And note how much altitude you're losing in it. What if you were trying to outclimb a mountain, and would you have that clearance? And often part of this review, again, is not just physically stick and rudder skill, but it's also reviewing those scenarios that can lead to it and how to prevent them in the first place.
Yeah, it's been interesting because I've just moved to a new plane. And so I've had to I knew my old plane really well. I knew exactly sort of my procedures, my flow checks. And so moving to this new plane has been really good to refresh all those things in my brain. I'm like, oh, right, I need to practice these things and also learn how they affect my new plane and things like that. So it's been good, and it's been eye-opening of how relaxed we can get sometimes when we're flying the same plane all the time and know it really well.
Not even the same plane. Sometimes the same plane loaded differently can be a totally new animal. 172 is familiar to most of our listeners probably, and they are comfortable with it. And we can do spins, stalls when we alight. Try the same 172 full tanks and 4 people in it. It's a completely different animal, different plane, different aerodynamics. It behaves differently, it feels different. So being mindful of that is also part of the training and pointing out the scenarios, because if a student was flying for 200 hours by themselves or with an instructor, and or a private license, after 50 hours, they get their license and they decide to take 3 friends with them, they can be up for a surprise, and that can be pretty nasty.
Yeah, I always appreciated the full load check flight when I graduated from Glacier. They'd be like, all right, load some friends in. We're going for a full gross flight. So that was good. Because definitely it approaches differently, it flares differently, everything's different.
And then you go in the mountains on a hot day.
Yeah.
My airplane, my Airshow plane, the Super Decathlon, is quite powerful. It's lightweight and 180 horsepower. So on a cool day, sea level, flying in pit practice area, doing aerobatics is so easy. I was flying several years in a row, the Airshow in Truckee, California. In July, 6,000 foot elevation of the airport, and it's usually more than 35, 36, up to 40 degrees Celsius. So the DA on the surface is already 9,000 feet.
Wow.
And you get into the circuit height where you start usually your aerobatic routine, and it feels like you're flying a glider because there is no air, there is no power, and the same plane becomes something different.
Yeah, bet. So somebody wanted to get into aerobatics, either air shows or competitions or just for themselves. Where do they start?
Aerobatics is a lot of fun. It's also a lot of focus. So the first step would usually be getting a tail wheel. There's no rating or endorsement by Transport Canada, but it's definitely a different set of skills. Theoretically, with your PPL on the 152, you can take a Citabri and go flying. You would be legal. It would probably not be a good idea.
The insurance companies probably want a few hours too.
Probably, like our insurance company requires 10 hours prior to going solo on a tail wheel, and I think it's pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
That's about the amount of time that it takes, because most of aerobatic planes are tail wheel for drag reasons, and before you can flip-flop the plane in the air, you should be able to take it up in the air and out of the air.
Yeah.
So that would definitely be a first step. Some people say, okay, can I try aerobatics? What if I get sick? What if I cannot handle it? I don't want to do all my tail wheel training prior to that. Yeah, for sure, we can do that. We do aerobatic FAM flights, basically. Don't touch anything on takeoff and landing. And then we can still do all the maneuvers. And then it depends what people want to do with aerobatics. Aerobatics flying for competitions, for air shows, or for instructing is somewhat different. At the competition, you probably push the airplane more to its limit. It's more precise flying, but you're not flying as close to the ground. Airshow flying is less strict because we are flying for general public, and it's more of a show and about how it looks rather than the technical straight lines as the aerobatic judges would want to see. And therefore flying is different. And I would typically ask people, what do they want to do before we even start training? Because this is the way I would guide their training in this case. I've done both. I mostly fly in air shows. I did compete in the beginning of my aerobatic flying until I said it's getting too many events in the summer. I still have to teach my regular students. And then there's obviously an option of aerobatic instructor. Usually it's something that is done by somebody who is already an airplane instructor and they want to just have an add-on. Although I did work with a couple of students who are not airplane instructors, or they have no interest of being airplane instructors, and they just wanted to teach aerobatics. And that's definitely an option as well. It does not exist in the States, but in Canada, it's a separate rating, aerobatic instructor rating. There is only class 1 and class 2. And they are valid for 3 and 4 years, just like airplane and helicopter ratings.
How much is involved with getting that add-on? What sort of maneuvers and things do you have to know how to teach? And
a funny thing is the legal requirement, if somebody already holds an instructor rating, to get an aerobatic instructor rating is 5 hours of briefing.
Oh, okay.
Period.
Right.
Now, if it's really enough, probably not. Realistically, what I had in my experience, somebody who is an airplane instructor and wants to become an aerobatic instructor. So if they don't have any aerobatic experience at all. So between teaching them aerobatics and teaching them how to teach aerobatics, it's about somewhere between 20 and 30 hours. Plus all the ground time that goes with it. But this is an easy part because if somebody is already an instructor, they know how to teach a maneuver, and then we only need to figure out how they teach a loop, a roll, a cubanate, hammerhead, and so on. So the maneuvers that are required on the flight test for aerobatic instructor are pretty basic. It's loop, roll, spin, Cuban, split S, hammerhead, bear roll. I think that's pretty much it.
The standards.
Standards, it's all in the cars. The focus is actually both with aerobatic instructor rating and even the Airshow certification for us as performers. It's about the emergency. But aerobatic instructor rating especially, it's not about doing fancy maneuvers. You hear competition aerobatic pilots, or performers like, okay, shoulder roll here, and you're pulling high G's and then a negative, and then we're doing the outside square loop. And the question is, why? 99% of people who are watching an air show would not know the difference between inside loop and outside loop.
Right.
And pushing the plane, or in case of an instructor, pushing the student or the envelope of what you're doing gets you too close to where you might not be comfortable recovering, or you can even do damage to the plane. So big part of training is knowing those limits and knowing when to take over and when to recover. So I can spend quite a bit on teaching a loop, and it's not about pulling on the stick and doing the vertical 360. It's about, okay, if the student went into that loop with not enough speed, how do you recover from it?
Right.
First of all, to recognize it. And if it happens in different stages, or if student does something unexpected when we are inverted, how do I recover from it? And this is a big part of the aerobatic instructor. It's not about doing the maneuvers, but it's anticipating and getting out of something that isn't going as it should have been.
Right, yeah. Teaching the maneuvers is one thing. Or performing them is one thing, and teaching them is a whole other thing.
Yeah, we teach good aerobatics first, and then we teach how to recover from bad aerobatics.
Yeah. Awesome. You touched on it earlier, but you, in 2017, you did the Canadian Arctic Aviation Tour, and that was part of the Canada 150 celebrations. And I think it had something like 97 shows or something like that. You got to go on that trip. Tell me a little bit about that.
It was for Canada's 150, and it was a special way from the aviation side to celebrate it by going to every single northern community in Canada and bringing an air show there. It was extremely rewarding and special because for Abbotsford crowd, an air show is like, oh yeah, another annual air show. Are we going this year or are we going somewhere else? For people in a community of Aklavik, well, 500 people live in there. This is an event of a lifetime. We got 100% attendance. The entire village was there every single time wherever we were going. And the response was very special. And I think we came up north to bring aviation, to share our passion. The other aspect was education. We visited schools, we talked to people, encouraging to get education, to learn things, for the young kids to get qualified, and to show that there is more out there, and then they can return to their community and bring their new knowledge. So there was the education aspect of the event. But I felt like we as performers were the ones who benefited the most, because what we have seen, what we have learned, the people we've met there, the way of life up north was so unreal. The first day of the trip, we went first to Rainbow Lake, Alberta, and then we were in one of the forts in Northwest Territories. And we are sitting there around the campfire after having a moose barbecue for the entire village.
Wow.
And first watching, and then the people there invited us to join them. We're doing drum dancing.
Nice.
And I'm there, I'm thinking, okay, yesterday I woke up in Vancouver, and now I'm drum dancing up north around the campfire. It felt like I was on a totally different planet. And people were so open to share their culture, their way of life. It was very special.
And how long was that tour, and how many did you do? All 97 stops?
The tour actually ended up being cut a little bit short. The total was 63 air shows that were performed, and I participated in 48 of them.
Wow. And that must have been great for your performance chops as well. Like, getting that many shows in a solid chunk, you must have been really honing your craft as well.
Very much so. It was challenging because at most of big air shows, when everything is prepared, you would have the very convenient aerobatic box markers. So you know exactly where you're flying. You have everything set up. You have the announcer, you have the music set up, you have search and crash, fire, rescue. And it's an air show typically that is not put the first time, so people have experience with it. Coming to a small community of 300 to 500 people, the air show was like, okay, we're doing it over the river between that tree and that tree. And the announcer was also the air boss, and the same person was the crash, fire, rescue. With a local villager sitting on his boat, ready to go towards you if you have to go down in the river. Wow. So that was a lot of adapting. Definitely makes you more aware of and more grateful for all the comfortable things we have here flying our regular shows. I also had, for technical reasons, switch aircraft about halfway, so I had to learn. I could fly the Citabria and could fly aerobatics in the Citabria, so part of the tour was done with the decathlon, part was done with the Citabria, so it, as a less powered plane, it makes you work harder doing the same maneuvers. So yes, I have learned a lot.
And the logistics of organizing that tour must have been incredible for the people who organized it.
Very much so. It's something that the tour itself was about a month, I would say 5 weeks maybe. And the preparation to it lasted more than a year.
Wow, yeah. Because
many places would not have avgas. Most of airshow planes are using avgas, not jet fuel. Those communities don't have it, so we had to ship ahead of time. Smoke oil, it's all the logistics to have it arranged. Not all places even have hotel rooms. In some villages, we would be like on John Doe's couch. And which is great. I mean, we got to experience in many places there are no hotels, no restaurants, and we were just part of that village. And at no point we were complaining. To the contrary, it was like we get to experience how local people live instead of being guests here. And it was very special. I wouldn't want it any other way.
Do you have any, what's your fondest memory of that trip? What's the one thing you kind of take away from it?
Oh, there were many. Kids were the best. The amazement that you see in their eyes when they see a plane, when they can come to the plane and touch it and sit inside. From the trip, I have a picture that is sitting here in my office, and it stayed here. I have in my plane 3 kids sitting inside, and the sheer joy on those faces is the biggest reward any performer could wish for.
Awesome. Well, we're almost coming up to an hour here. I'm gonna stop this episode there because there's a bunch of more stuff I want to talk to you about.
Okay.
You started a series on YouTube called Healthy Aviation too, which I think is important to talk about, but that could be a whole episode on its own. But yeah, I'm really glad we had you on, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me. It was great to meet you, great to chat with you. I've been listening to your great podcast for the last year. You are doing amazing, and happy to be part of it, and looking forward to talking to you again.
Yeah, and actually, the one thing I wanted to, we skipped over it earlier. This is going to come out right before March, and March is the Women in Aviation Month, and I know you're pretty active in that. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on with that? And of course, right now it's a little difficult because of COVID, but yeah, what's up this year? Do you know?
I don't know about specific events that will actually be happening this year because, like you said, COVID restrictions, everything is changing daily pretty much. The events that do usually happen is Girls Flight 2 is one of the bigger ones, and it's available to all women and girls who have never been on a small plane before or never been on a plane, and it's a completely free event. Everybody working on it, volunteers, and it's donations that make it possible. And the idea is to introduce as many women and girls to aviation, and hopefully it sparks some new excitement and we'll have more female pilots.
And where can people find you online, or if you want to find out more about Anna, where do we go?
I have my website, my Airshow Performer website. It's www.annaskydancer.com. Or they can find out more about the flight training we're doing at Canadian Flight Center, which is www.cfc, like Canadian Flight Center, .aero, A-E-R-O. And we have all the training questions there, or just send me an email. It's anna@cfc.aero.
Nice. So I'm going to come do some rolls and loops and aerobatics with you.
I have to warn you, it's addicting.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Thanks, Anna, and thanks to you for listening. I'll post links to Anna and CFC's YouTube channels where you can find the flight test debrief series and some videos of her airshow performance. If you'd like to support the show, please leave a review or consider signing up as a patron at patreon.com/flyingbc. And now, you have control.